big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. Welcome to the Eastern Promise podcast, bringing you the sweet, sweet taste of opportunity and potential direct from the east of England. I'm your host and wholesome nut at the centre, Mike Rigby. This week, we welcome Member of Parliament for Ipswich, Jack Abbott, recorded in Ipswich at the University of Suffolk. I had a lot of questions for Jack about his road to Parliament, his maiden speech, his adjustment to the arcane traditions of the House of Commons, and above all, Jack's unique role as the government's missions champion for the East of England. The answers are all here, so it's my pleasure to welcome not only Jack Abbott MP, but you, dear listener, to this week's episode of Eastern Promise. Ipswich! Birthplace of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who gifted the bed of the River Orwell to the people of this town. Home of the Tractor Boys, and, for all you vampires listening, home of the UK's first blood bank. One of Ipswich's crown jewels is its waterfront, and it's from there, in the James Hehir building of the University of Suffolk, that I met Jack Abbott MP, the town's Member of Parliament. Jack was elected in July 2024, part of an epochal shift in parliamentary representation in our region. If you're in the market for a piscine metaphor, it's all the East of England move from being a massive electoral blue whale to a rainbow shoal, with every national party electing at least one MP. Getting Jack's view as a new MP, regardless of party affiliation, would be interesting enough, but to pique our interest further, Jack was appointed as the government's missions champion for the East of England. Many of you are eager to know what this means in practice, so clear the division lobbies, because now Jack will explain it all. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here with my guest today on the Eastern Promise podcast, and that is Jack Abbott, the MP for Ipswich. Jack, welcome to Eastern Promise. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So, we'll start in the obvious place. Who is Jack Abbott?
Wow, that's a very deep philosophical question, I think, to start. It's a good question. I mean, look, I'm someone who has lived in Suffolk for about a quarter of a century now, 25 years. In Suffolk terms, unless you're born here, that's not totally local, but I think I've done my time here long enough to say that I'm local boy, so someone who is very passionate and loves the place where I'm really privileged and honoured to now represent. And look, I'm also quite, I guess, impatient, I think in a positive way. I've been around the block for long enough to see that we've got huge potential, but also get frustrated that we don't move sometimes as fast as I think we should do, certainly to fulfil that potential. And that kind of really drives my politics. It's a little bit of a put your money where your mouth is. And, you know, part of the reason why I got involved in the first place years ago, I was sort of late teens, early 20s. I remember being one of those people shouting at the TV. And I think my dad, exasperated, said something like, why don't you go do something about it? And perhaps in a bit of a stroppy way, I said, well, maybe I will then. But I think actually that, as I say, kind of informs where I'm at. I'm unhappy, in my view, with where I've seen the progress or indeed lack of it in both my town and my county. And I have a fairly good idea, I think, of where I think we should be able to go. And so, you know, it's no use me just sort of yelling from the sofa at the TV. It's we'll go and do something about it. And, you know, I've been in now for a little over 6 months. And I think what people will recognise is I'm not kind of just content to sit here for the next few years and see where we get to. You know, I'm fed up of those meetings already, which are telling me, oh no, it's too difficult to do that. Let's talk about it in 6 months. I said, well, we haven't got that sort of time. I'm not certainly sitting around for that sort of time. So really focusing on delivery and kind of really enacting that positive change, not just as part of the government nationally, but here in Ipswich too.
I mean, that's really interesting. And did you start out as a councillor, or did you sort of not leapfrog, but did you sort of go, no, this is where I want to be, straight for Member of Parliament?
I mean, I'd say it's a bit of a convoluted journey in a way. Like, although I guess my kind of family are a political small p. You know, I've sort of remember the '97 election. I don't come from a big political family. You know, they weren't involved in the party, and it wasn't until I went to university and really by a complete chance circumstance that I sort of stumbled across an existing MP while out campaigning in Barnsley. I signed up, you know, to become a member of the Labour Party. Didn't really know what you're supposed to do next. Got an email through one day and said, oh, do you want to come door knocking in Barnsley? There's a by-election for Dan Jarvis, it was at the time. Went door knocking all day, and then this guy at the end goes, oh, we really like you. Do you want to come to my summer school? And I was engaged in politics, but I'll be honest, I wasn't an anorak. And I said, well, that sounds great, mate, but no offence, who are you? And it turned out to be the MP for Luton South at the time, and I went on a summer school. Then, you know, it kind of really opened my eyes, not just being front of house as an MP or a councillor, but, you know, all the other stuff that goes into political campaigning and whatever it might be. And I came back home after uni, and you know, one thing led to another. I, you know, carried on being involved and ended up running for the safe-ish then seat, Conservative seat for Central Suffolk North Ipswich, where I grew up in Debenham, and I was only 23 when I was elected, 24 at the time of the election, and it kind of carried on from there. I became a county councillor here in Ipswich in 2017 when I was about 26. Took on the education brief, which I absolutely loved, and again, you know, talking about what informs and drives your politics, you know, education opportunity for me, and being here at the university is kind of a bit symbolic of that, if I'm honest. But I'll be really clear. I saw 2021. I'd sort of, you know, I wasn't really sure. You know, we'd had a bit of a beating in 2019, and I'd stepped away from the council. You know, I'd done my 4 years. I saw it really as a 4-year project there, and I was unconvinced. But the more I thought about, you know, I think whoever runs next time, I think they need to be really, really upbeat and ambitious for Ipswich. I think I know what sort of campaign we'd need to win here, and what sort of values you'd want to take forward. And the more I sort of almost talked to myself about it, the more I thought, again, it's that put your money where your mouth is piece. I was like, I can't leave this thing alone. And partly because, you know, you'd worked on so many campaigns, I sort of said to myself, is this going to be the one you step out of? You know, you're going to kind of abdicate your responsibility, as I saw it, to sort of stay out that fight, despite spending most of my adult life, you know, fighting for the Labour Party, but, you know, for Ipswich and Suffolk more widely. And so, you know, I came to the conclusion that actually this is something I sort of had to do. And you could call it FOMO, fear of missing out, or whatever it is, but I kind of felt that I knew what I wanted to do here, and I knew what sort of campaign we did. And, you know, as I said, I was really privileged to be able to run that campaign in the way I did, and now to be sat here as a Member of Parliament for Ipswich. So it took a lot of thought. Yeah. But, you know, instinct as well really informs politics a lot of the time, and so my instincts drove me towards this place too.
So it would be very easy to sit here and sort of list all the ways that, you know, that Ipswich needs help and needs support and needs guidance. But what I'd really like you to do is to just sort of give us a quick thumbnail of your constituency, as it were, but also what the parts. I mean, we're sitting in this fantastic building with a view to die for. What are the parts of Ipswich that really give you hope for the future, and sort of you think this is the kind of Ipswich I want to see, and I want more of this, please?
I mean, it's a really good question, and you know, the word hope again is one of those things that kind of really informs my politics. I remember being blown away seeing Barack Obama's inauguration speech, and I remember my teacher at the time turned off the TV and said he'll never be as great as he is now. There was such hope and expectation. He could have never possibly lived up to it. But equally, I do think people need hope. And, you know, as I say, I've been campaigning in Ipswich for the best part of a decade and a half now. And I have to be honest, I haven't seen poverty like I've seen, but also exhaustion. And by that I mean just not, leaving aside the fact that people are looking over their shoulders every single month about every bill that comes in or whatever it might be. There's this huge exhaustion that things don't work. You call a GP and you sit for hours trying to get an appointment and then you don't get one, or you can't get an NHS dentist, or you're worried about the state of the schools, or you drive on pothole-ridden roads. There seems to be that exhaustion, and to be honest with you, a lack of hope that things can get better, and a cynicism. And I'm really, really aware of that, coming into my job, and part of the reason, I've already mentioned about delivery. I've talked a good game, as it were. I've talked for 2 years as a candidate about what I'd like to do here. Also about having to change our culture. I talked a lot about leadership, unity, ambition. I thought those elements were really crucial. We can talk about big infrastructure projects, but unless we change the culture, we'll still be in that, that's too difficult, or whatever kind of phase. So I think, in terms of where I think we can go, it's why I see the energy transition as a massive opportunity for us, because yes, it will bring new jobs and kind of huge hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment along with it. But what does that tangibly mean for people? Well, for me, it means kids growing up now have the promise of a secure, well-paid, unionised job, not just at Sizewell C, for example, but a huge amount of opportunities, whether it's offshore wind, solar, or we could become a real hub here about, retrofitting, even manufacturing. So that's the tangible change. And then they say, I've had it come back to me, say, do people really care about new jobs? And so, well, they're important. I'll tell you why they're important, right? You shake your head, but
I seem shocked.
Because it's an interesting thing about, again, having to have a decent enough conversation with people about what happens in terms of the domino effect. Why does that matter, right? Well, it matters because, you take the town centre, it's visually one of the biggest litmus tests for me as an MP. People will judge my success, fairly or otherwise, on how well the high street looks, how well it's doing, or how many shops there. And I have to say honestly with people, I could, although my direct levers of power are limited in some respects, fill every single shop we've got on the high street with all the brands from all over the world. But if no one's got any money to go and spend a bit of cash, whether it's doing a bit of shopping or taking the kids to the cinema or going and have a bite to eat and drink, it's sort of all for nothing. We can't sustain those businesses if people don't have decent jobs. Whereas I say they don't have to look over their shoulder every single month. It's joining those arguments together. And so, that's why I talk about the energy transition or net zero and opportunity and ambition, because actually you do all those things right, you get the domino effect happening in other places too. Yeah. And so, again, where I look to where I want Ipswich to be, whether it's in 5 years' time or if I'm fortunate enough for a little bit longer, 10, I want people to be able to see, well, actually, it feels like we're really going somewhere, that we're not just talking about potential anymore, we're really fulfilling it. And we can go on to arts and culture, it's again another really kind of important aspect, but just really tangibly, that's where we've got to do the short-term stuff, like secure those jobs and investment, and if we do the right things, that can be really sustainable for where we want to go for as a town as well.
I have to say, it baffles me that people wouldn't want new jobs. I think yeah. No, I get what you're saying, that some people sort of, change frightens people. On any level, and we had this conversation on a panel we did on how the Brex in Norfolk could support the growth of Cambridge. I'm sure there's parts of Suffolk that could do the same, should that be what they would want to do. And the point came out that doing nothing is not no change. Doing nothing is simply a different type of change, a worse type of change, an unguided type of change. But anyway, this is a really strong point you make. But I'd like to come on, not least because I'm amused about the idea of you having a Twitter spat with Ed Balls, a very good-natured Twitter spat with Ed Balls. But first of all, your induction as an MP, because when I sort of career where your aide Oscar is, my then boss was already well established. But Tell us about your induction as an MP and your maiden speech, because I'm really interested to know what the pressure is on your maiden speech, because you don't get a do-over.
No, you don't get a second go. It's got to be good. I mean, look, I'll say a few things. It's a weird situation, unlike almost any other job in the world, where you don't even get a month's notice period. You do in the sense that I had 2 years to think about what if, because I was, I think, the 8th candidate selected in the country. I think I did 103 weeks on the campaign trail. So that's, in a way, a long time to think about it. But of course, part of you is just totally focused on getting over the line and winning the election. But as they always say, not that you want to be measuring the curtains exactly, but you want to have a clear idea of not just what you want to do next, but your personal circumstances and all that sort of stuff. What are you going to work on while you're down in Westminster, or what your priority is going to be in Ipswich, who you might hire. You come over the line and just be really clear with people. I won on the early hours of Friday morning, and I was suddenly in a brand new job on Sunday morning. Yeah. So there isn't much time to digest that, and you don't have staff given to you. You don't even have an office. You're basically hot desking, as it were, for 2 months then. So it's a tiny bit surreal, and it's I describe it as almost a rubbish university freshers fair, because you go around all the stalls, and the security briefings terrify the hell out of you. Then you meet the register of interest people, and trust me, they really terrify the hell out of you. But you don't get Domino's pizza at the end of it. So you kind of have that weird sort of rapid induction experience. As a little aside, one of the funnier things was you go around and all the doorkeepers, as they're called, who make the place tick over. They're all saying, "Hello, Mr. Abbott." I'm thinking, blimey, are they hundreds of them? There's about 4,000 people who work on this day, but it felt like hundreds of people all knew who I was. And I'm not saying it was a big ego massage, but I found it quite disconcerting. As I said, I only had 2 days, if that, to kind of learn your name. Anyways, at the end of it, I had to talk in conversation with the last one. He said, "We'll give the game away. Your name's Jack Abbott, so you're the top of the list, and you're the first name we all have to learn out of the 300 odd new MPs that we've had. So we're cheating a little bit. We don't always know everybody, but yours right at the top of the list." So there was that kind of weird quirk. Fortunately, I'd worked down there a little bit before for a previous MP, not particularly long, but for long enough that you don't get completely wowed by the place. It is one of those places where it's an enormous institution. You feel the heritage and the history sort of weighing on you, I think. But the kind of bit that hit it home was first your swearing in ceremony. So you go and shake hands. You're basically swearing an oath, but in my head I was like, you're here to do a job. You're not here to take in all this grandeur. It was almost that moment, I'm like, right here, let's crack on. So you're taking an oath almost on behalf of the people at Ipswich, so you're going to work hard. But yeah, you mentioned the maiden speech, and you think about how you might go, and there's sort of Preston, you meant to thank your predecessor, maybe tell a joke or two, and maybe raise a couple of things that are important to you, but also a bit of history about your constituency as well. So, I've already mentioned the energy transition. We've got to mention arts and culture, and a whole heap of other things. Special education needs was a real passion of mine. Working as a local councillor, I used to be a teaching assistant, so I mentioned that too. But also, I'll be honest, it became a little bit of an ode to the place where I've grown up. I mentioned my old cricket club. Well, I say my old cricket club, still my cricket club 20 odd years later. I'm still a creature of habits, and now Iron Districts are in there, Hansard, my lighthouse restaurant in Albury, where not only have I eaten for years, but I used to work there a little bit as well. So it was a nice opportunity for me to indulge very slightly in things I loved about growing up in Suffolk. On my PMQs, there was a bit of a spat with Ed Balls, famously a Norwich fan. And not only did I have my main speech that week, I also draw out the lucky dip for the first ever PMQs of the new government. And again, that's an enormous sort of, where do I go from here? I sort of went down, to focus on my priority, as I mentioned earlier. We've got to revive our high streets, but also how do I grab a little bit of attention and make everyone sort of remember it. So it's a very cheap but easy laugh to say that Ipswich Town now has a Premier League football club and our friends over the border do not. So that seems to settle not only Keir into a stride, but myself there. It's a daunting experience when you stand up. It's a very small chamber. And and it's very narrow as well. So when you stand up, everybody is really looking at you. I know it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but you feel that kind of pressure cooker. And so in a way, you don't have a chance to feel nervous. You've got to brush out the cobwebs. And starting, as I say, with a friendly joke at Norwich's expense was an easy way to go, perhaps. But it was a nice and special week for sure to go forward with.
Well, I'm bound to bring up, aren't I, that you are the government's, correct me if I'm wrong, we've got the nomenclature wrong here, but the government's mission champion for the East of England.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes, I am. Good. No, it's good to confirm.
Well,
that, yeah.
I'm just really intrigued how that came about, and on the one hand, I don't want to undersell it, but on the other one, I don't want to put far more pressure on it than it can bear. So, tell us more about that.
Well, look, I don't think you put any more pressure on, because I remember watching BBC Look East, and for whatever reason, they decided to mention the fact that I was an East of England mission champion, but they put on the Champions League music when they did it. And again, it's a lovely ego boost in a way, apart from the fact that I was sat next to my girlfriend. She looked at me as if I'd put on the Champions League music, and she said, "Oh God, you're a bit of a moron." And I was like, that wasn't me, sort of thing. That really wasn't me. Look, I think it's a really smart idea in the sense that for a long time, there's a lot of areas, in particular the East of England, but others like the South West perhaps, which have felt like they've lost out when it comes to government funding or part of the wider kind of national conversation. And I think it was a real clear signal of intent that the government recognised that coming in, we really had to make sure that those voices were being heard. So, look, as you say, we're not on the government payroll exactly. It's a nice, fun title, mission champ for the East of England. It sounds very grand, but it does have a serious point, and it gives me a platform and opportunity to be able to really bang the drum for the East. Part of what that entails is we have weekly meetings with Ellie Reeve, who's de facto, essentially chair of the party, a political lead from the parliamentary point of view. We have a senior cabinet member who comes to speak to us, whether that's Ed Miliband or Darren Jones or Wes Streeting, and we can kind of feed up saying, well, look, these are kind of the issues we're picking up a lot in the East. And so raising up with Ed about Sizewell C, or being able to talk to Wes and say, look, we've got a real problem when it comes to things like mental health, dentistry. So it gives us a platform to be able to talk about those issues. And part of our responsibility will going out the other way and talking to businesses, other organisations, and working out what is working well in terms of government delivery and what isn't going so well. I don't think it's any secret that our in-tray coming in as an incoming government was pretty large on just about every issue you can think of, but it offers a really important conduit between, yes, our backbench regional MPs, between businesses and organisations, and the other way. And I think it's really helpful as well for those cabinet members and the secretaries of state and etc. to be able to kind of really hear directly about what's working, what's not working so well. I think it's easy when you're coming into the government, you go, blimey, we've just got so much to do. And not that you become tunnel vision, but you can lose that link. It's happened to all governments of all stripes in the past. They're really keen to not let that break happen. So, as I say, grand title, it is a privilege to be able to, as it were, be part of the wider government agenda so early on in my parliamentary career. But again, the last thing I would mention is it offers us here in Ipswich another voice, another seat at the table, an opportunity to really bang the drum as well. So, anything that helps me kind of get in front of people and push our agenda here locally is certainly not one that I was going to pass up.
No, absolutely. I mean, I saw on the podcast this week, talking to the mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Dr. Nick Johnson, about how at the time of recording he is the only Metro mayor in the region, and what that meant to him. Did that put extra pressure on him whilst he's at the table, and what that gave it access to? And a similar thing, because obviously the mayors get together, and from the point of view of Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex and all the other parts of the region, you're sitting there thinking, well, that's fantastic, but we're not there, as it were. But to have you there is certainly a great bonus. And I suppose my next question is, what can the rest of the East of England, rest of the East, do to support you in that role, to make sure that there is both a pipeline of concerns for you to pass up, but I think, from my point of view, more importantly, a pipeline of good news stories, of things where actually we're we want to share more broadly, because that's what we're all about, Eastern Promise, essentially.
I mean, part of the problem I think we've had, and I mean this as broadly as a region, is we sometimes feel quite disparate, right? Suffolk has been put in the same region as, say, Bedford, or, which is about two-hour drive away. What really combines us? There's, we've got the devolution piece that's happening, so there's a real obvious connect between Suffolk and Norfolk as part of East Anglia, or the traditional East Anglia region. So part of, I think, the problem has been, when we've come to that pulling power, is we've kind of operated in our own silos a little bit. I think what's really positive, Rachel Reeve, the Chancellor, recently just made a massive announcement when we came in, investment around, the Cambridge corridor, Cambridge-Oxford corridor, and that's a massive plus for us. To slap the badge of Cambridge on anything is a massive boon when it comes to international development or whatever it would be. My really crucial thing in terms of an agenda is making sure then that is spread right throughout the region. So I really, really positively and warmly welcome that massive kind of signal intent for Cambridge. But I also know that actually to even unlock that potential in Cambridge as well is to do things, for example, like the Ely-Hawley rail junctions, right? Now, part of and just a good tangible example of how we can work better together as a region is say, look, this is crucial for us down in Ipswich, because we've got Felixstowe Port, one of the world's largest container ports on our doorstep, but we've already seen firms eye up the London Gateway or elsewhere because we've not had enough infrastructure development. And to be really clear about the knock-on effect of Ipswich is we've got thousands of jobs, hundreds of millions of pounds worth on the line. It's not hyperbole to suggest that. But I also know to get those bigger schemes up is to scale it up in government side, saying, look, this is projects not just of local kind of things. This isn't just about little old Ipswich. This is about our region. This is about our entire national economy. And so I've been really clear working with kind of partners, whether it's MPs, other politicians of all stripes, or businesses or organisations, bringing in Norfolk, bringing in Cambridgeshire, and actually with that kind of collective action, I'm hopeful that, if not in this spending review, then hopefully in one of the nearer ones, that we're going to be able to get funding for Ely-Hawley and finally move that project forward after 15 years. That's just sort of one example, but that is the sort of process and attitude we've got to have in terms of all the kind of big investment in infrastructure pieces. And we're much stronger advocating for stuff to government when we're doing it collectively. That's the biggest kind of, not lesson to me over the last 15 years, but certainly where I'm trying to go as both a mission champion and look, I'm the Eastern Parliamentary Labour Party chair, which means I'm chairing 27 MPs from our party, chairing an inward investment group for the East of England as well. So strategically, where I'm trying to go is making sure we're using those kind of platforms and positions of influence to really kind of bind that stuff together and drive it forward.
I think absolutely, and I think it's all about bringing in those fellow travellers as well. The more the merrier, but perhaps you can help me sort of. I have this thing, and maybe it's sort of born of experience, but I get very frustrated at events when I hear talk about this is our ask to government. And I always think that, as valid as that is, you always want to be talking in terms of an offer. This is our offer, and that attracts more attention when you're going to put in a strong offer and say, this is our offer, these are the things that need to be changed. And people have heard me bang on about this ad infinitum, but these are the things we might need a bit of help to change. But with those changes in mind, this is our offer. I suppose I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but what's your considered opinion?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think, take Ely-Hawley as an example. There is understandably a very strong push for the government, for example, to write a cheque in the latest spending review and fund it. Well, the last business case was done about 7-8 years ago. So we keep saying, this is a £500 million project, but construction costs have gone through the roof over the past few, and we won't get into the politics of why that might have happened. For example, there might have been a certain mini budget which didn't particularly help. But we can't rely on the government to simply write a blank cheque and say, whatever it costs, we're sure we'll deliver it. It's up to us to actually help, bring that project together. Because at the moment, some of this stuff is little more than a concept, important as those they may be, and we've got to get the ball rolling from somewhere. But again, you're absolutely right. It's really bottoming out. Well, what can we do more for the government, for the country, if you give us these things? And sometimes they might be as small is, if you electrify the rail line down at Felixstowe, for your listeners who don't know, we've got one of the world's largest container ports, but we have this nonsense where trains have to decouple about a mile out of Felixstowe and then go again, right? It's huge delays because we haven't done the simplified thing as electrifying the line down there. And you're absolutely right. We've got to be much better about arguing case. We've got to see government not as a business per se, but no business would write a blank check on a concept, right? They want to know, well, what return of investment are you going to give me? What sort of benefits are you going to be able to demonstrate, whether it's extra jobs or investment to local and regional and national economy? And look, that's partly why the delivery piece is really important to me. You know, for example, when I came into office, what I'd been really frustrated about for ages about Sizewell and other energy schemes is absolutely we've got to do the mitigation stuff, right? But we'd spent so long as a county saying why we don't want stuff. We'd done a hugely bad job of asking for stuff, right? So I came in July and I got almost immediately on the phone to EDF and said, I want a jobs guarantee for Ipswich. I know you're going to create 10,000 jobs. You hope around a third of them will be from around about a 90-minute radius. But I want to secure hundreds of jobs here. I want you to guarantee that's going to be the case. And not only that, to fill those jobs, I know we're going to need investment in our education courses, in our colleges, the university here. And so, you know, by October, funnily enough, on my 34th birthday, not a bad birthday present, get 500 jobs, but we also had a guarantee of 2 jobs fairs, investment into our local college courses, new investment into some of our charity and the third sector, and also continuation of tens of millions of pounds worth of investment. So that is also just the start. You know, we want to keep going on that stuff. So for me, it's not just good enough saying, going up to government and say, oh, by the way, can you chuck us half a billion quid, $1 billion there? We've got to be able to tangibly say, this is the return on investment if you give us these resources. So I'm excited about the potential, but we've got to do things differently to what we've been doing over the previous decade and a half.
Absolutely. I mean, the old story I often deploy is if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got.
And the proof is in the pudding. We have not moved on in any real significant infrastructure scheme, particularly in the east of the east. You know, we know the benefits and the potential in other parts of the region, and to a degree they're easy sales. As I say, if you put Cambridge sticker on something, people get very excited. Well, I've got the same ambition for Ipswich stuff. And one thing I would kind of, you know, going back a little bit to where you said about the jobs front, and people say, oh, you know, who needs jobs? You know, genuinely that has been a comment back to me. But I remember sitting on a panel about saying how our government's mission, and this is pre-election, but the Labour Party's mission, if it should enter government, is to become a world-leading energy superpower. And I said, well, my ambition is, if we're going to be a world energy superpowers country, I want that to be led right here in Ipswich, Suffolk. We've got, you know, Sizewell, the offshore wind, solar, we could do so much more. And what really annoyed me was about 3 people, they're business political leaders who laughed. They were laughing at the idea that we could lead the way here. And I'm not saying that all of our ambitions and aspirations will always come off, but if we don't show any, we can't expect us to, you know, gain that investment. I mean, what prospective business is going to come here and go, well, they don't think they can deliver anything, so why would we come here? You know, it's got to be a mentality shift in order to deliver any of that stuff.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's the refuge, it's the weakest argument to sort of say, well, if I try and fail, that'll be on us. But if I don't try, then I won't have failed. Yeah. Well, no, we try. You know, you keep. I mean, how long did it take to get I'm sort of slightly showing my Norfolk colours here, the A11 duelled. Having said that, when I was working as a caseworker, I remember opening letters from people saying, for God's sake, stop duelling the A11, people will come. Well, because we want to come. You spend money in the shops, you know. Oh, anyway. You sort of, to go back quickly before we wrap up to what the Chancellor said this week about the Oxcam Arc, you're absolutely right. We are in Eastern Promise in June of this year is hosting what we call a new town sandbox, which will be looking at a spot on the Cambridge-Norwich corridor to say, if we were to build a new town, how would we do it right? How would we make it embed active travel, embed mental health, embed car use as a choice, and one that you're not fussed about really, rather than a necessity as it is for so many rural areas. Now, what I sort of ask you is, if we could sort of flip that and say there's no reason at all why we can't do another one looking at Ipswich-Cambridge corridor. So what kind of results from both an Ipswich MP and missions champion, would you like to see, would be helpful to you coming out of that sandbox? Would we produce some kind of vision document?
Well, look, I mean, what you described there is, an ambition of what we want our towns and other kind of urban areas to look like in the future. We've seen some real success stories. I mean, even on a really small basis, we've got a small town called Kesgrave, basically on the Ipswich border. And we, funny enough, went to a primary school the other day, and we've got this thing called bikeability scheme. So it's about kids cycling to school. We're actually slightly above the national average, about 61% of kids or something like that have taken up this scheme. But they say it's really difficult to do because we've got quite an old, almost, dare I say, medieval road network. We're a medieval town. Not all of our road networks is medieval, to be really clear about that. But Kesgrave, next door, nearly all the kids walk and cycle to school because that estate was built with the high school in mind, and they knew that connectivity would exist. So, and one of the other arguments, and we're seeing it a little bit from some elements of, for example, the construction and housing industry, about some of the regulations we'd like to put on. And when I say regulations, I say the homes should be energy efficient, or they should be set up for things like solar panels and whatever else. We know this stuff can be done. We've seen some top quality social housing developments in Norwich, for example, nationally award-winning stuff. We know that our council here in Ipswich has got a really great record of retrofitting their existing social housing stock. So for me, again, whether it's coming to new towns or whether it's coming to brand new infrastructure we need, or even the arts and culture piece that I know we haven't come to yet, it's about showing the ambition and leadership, to be honest, and that's going back to my leadership point. You're always going to have some people who say, oh, no, that's too difficult, or, oh, we shouldn't do that, we shouldn't do new development. And partly we're a circumstance of time in that we urgently need to build new infrastructure, particularly on the energy sphere, in order to kind of protect our long-term energy security and cost of living interests. But I'm also really fed up with this mentality of it's too difficult, let's think about it another day, or let's not think about doing things differently.
That just makes it harder.
It makes it harder, but also we can't keep saying no over and over again. We've got to see progress. So absolutely, I want to make sure that any development that happens, whether it's big new towns or whether it's kind of other infrastructure, local people should be able to inform that. But equally, we can't have this sort of aspect, which we've got at the moment, we've had for a long time, of a few people are saying no for the short-term sort of gain. We've got to start acting in long-term interests of local areas as well. So, in short, there's huge opportunities of what we're looking to do. Yes, we need new transport and infrastructure. I never would advocate let's build thousands of houses without brand new schools or highways or whatever it might be. But we've got to see that stuff happening and see, I know with our mandate in the next 5 years, this is our opportunity to push through what, in my view, is incredibly positive, long-lasting change, both for Ipswich and Suffolk, but our region as a whole. So I'm excited about the opportunity. I'll be leading the charge on it.
Well, that's fantastic. And you'll be pleased to know that one of the rules for the sandbox is we're going to look at localised renewable energy grid. So there you go. Jack Abbott, what a pleasure. I wish you every success as the Member of Parliament for Ipswich, and hopefully we'll have you on Eastern Promise again someday. But for now, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My huge thanks to Jack Abbott for carving out a very valuable slice of his Friday diary for Eastern Promise. As a former MP staffer myself, I know not only how valuable this time is, I also know that I owe a debt of gratitude to Jack's team, Oscar Crowe and John Joe McMahon. Thank you all. And that's it for this, episode 128 of the Eastern Promise podcast. I have been Mike Rigby, and I will be so again next week, when I will be chatting with the members of the Norwich Financial Industry Group, direct from their annual conference at the world-famous Marble Hall in Norwich, spiritual home of the insurance giant Aviva. I'll also be joined by Henrietta Billings of the Save Britain's Heritage charity, discussing their upcoming conference taking place in the east of England in the ancient and venerable city of Norwich. That's in 7 days' time. So until then, bye for now. to hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Pudding Shed production in proud association with Mills and Reeve, achieving more together.